The room was built for power. Cigarette smoke curled lazily toward the ceiling, mixing with the smell of expensive cologne and old money. On this night, the laughter was loud. He was in his late 50s, silver hair slicked back, thick gold ring flashing as he raised a glass. His voice carried authority without effort. When Victor spoke, people leaned in. Across the table sat Dean Martin, not the singer, just a dark blazer, white shirt, and eyes that seemed older than his years. Most people in the room didn't know why he was there. They only knew Victor Romano had invited him, and that alone made Dean untouchable for now. Victor took a slow sip of whiskey and smirked. Brave enough to get himself killed. A few men chuckled nervously. Victor continued, smiling wider. Guess bravery doesn't run in the family anymore, huh? Silence slammed into the room. Every man there understood the rules. You didn't mention the dead. You didn't mock family. And you never joked about loss unless you were ready to start a war. Dean Martin's brother had died 3 years earlier, shot during a robbery gone wrong. A good man. A man who had tried to stop violence instead of running from it. Everyone waited for Dean to explode. Instead, he breathed, slowly, deeply. Then he looked up at victorromano.com. To calm. Past that refused to stay buried before that night. Dean Martin lived quietly. He worked as a community organizer in a rough neighborhood where people didn't trust outsiders, and survival was a daily skill. He helped kids find scholarships, talked ex-convicts into second chances, and convinced angry men that fists weren't the only answer. And his brother Michael had been the same way. Michael was the kind of man who stepped between danger and strangers. He believed that kindness wasn't weakness. It was courage in its purest form. The night he died, he wasn't looking for trouble. Trouble found him. Dean never talked about it publicly. He carried that grief like a sealed letter, heavy, private, and unopened. Until tonight. The mob boss's game. Victor Romano loved control. This dinner wasn't about business. It was a test. A joke, Victor said lightly, raising an eyebrow at Dean. Relax. Dean didn't move, didn't smile, didn't raise his voice. Instead, he set his glass down gently. The sound echoed louder than expected. The calm before the storm. Dean looked directly at Victor, not with anger. Dean continued, his voice steady. He believed that stepping in could save lives, that speaking up mattered, that kindness could interrupt violence. Victor chuckled. And how'd that work out for him? Dean didn't flinch. He died, Dean said. But he died being the man he chose to be. The laughter died instantly. Dean leaned forward slightly, not aggressively, but intentionally. And I'm still alive, he continued, because I learned something from him. Victor narrowed his eyes. Oh yeah? What's that? Dean met his gaze. That real power doesn't come from making people afraid. The air thickened. It comes from deciding who you are. Even when someone tries to humiliate you. Why no one interrupted, no one spoke. Not because they were scared of Victor, but because something unexpected was happening. Dean wasn't challenging him. He wasn't threatening him. He was refusing to play. Victor had broken men with insults before, had watched them shout, cry, beg, or lash out. That gave him leverage. Dean gave him nothing. No reaction, no weakness, no submission. Just truth. A warning disguised as wisdom. Dean sat back, folding his hands. You made a joke about my brother, he said calmly. I understand why. You wanted to see if I'd lose control. Victor smiled thinly. And I won't, Dean replied, because losing control is how good men become broken men. The word good hung in the air like a challenge. Dean added softly, my brother believed every room gives you a choice. You can leave people smaller, or you can leave them better. Victor stared at him. Dean finished. I'll let you decide which kind of man you want to be tonight. The shock, No threats, no insults, no raised voice. Yet every man in the room felt it. Victor Romano, the man who ruled through fear, had just been handed a mirror. For the first time in years, Victor didn't laugh. He leaned back slowly, studying Dean like a puzzle he couldn't solve. "You got nerve," Victor said. Dean nodded. "I got values." Silence followed. Then Victor lifted his glass again. "To your brother," he said slowly. "Brave man." Dean inclined his head. "Thank you." The tension didn't disappear, but it shifted. Respect had entered the room. Reluctant, unwanted, but undeniable. That night didn't end in violence, but something far more dangerous had begun. Victor Romano had met a man he couldn't intimidate. A man whose strength came from loss, not ego. A man who refused to bend without ever raising his fist. And Victor hated that. Because men like Dean Martin don't just survive power games, they change them. Victor Romano did not sleep that night. That alone disturbed him. Men like Victor slept easily. His conscience had been buried decades ago beneath loyalty oaths and unmarked graves. Yet now, as dawn crept through the tall windows of his mansion, one calm voice echoed in his head. Real power doesn't come from making people afraid. Victor tightened his jaw. It wasn't the words that bothered him. It was the way they had landed. Dean Martin hadn't insulted him, hadn't challenged him publicly, hadn't begged or bowed. Instead, he had done something far more dangerous. He had spoken without fear. Around him stood men who had survived by reading his moods like weather signs. None dared speak first. Finally, Victor raised a hand. Victor's eyes narrowed. Nobody's clean. Dean Martin wasn't supposed to exist in Victor's world. He didn't run numbers, didn't owe favors, didn't crave status, and yet people listened to him. That kind of influence, quiet, unpaid, unforced, made Victor uneasy. Fear he could control. Respect earned without intimidation. That was unpredictable. Dean's world, far from luxury, while Victor plotted, Dean's morning looked nothing like power. Kids ran past him laughing. A woman thanked him for helping her son apply for college. An older man shook his hand, gratitude written into every wrinkle on his face. Dean smiled easily. But inside, he was alert. Victor Romano didn't invite people for conversation. He invited them to measure them. And Dean knew something else. Men like Victor never forgot being challenged, especially by calm. A ghost from the past. Late that afternoon, Dean received a call. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "Dean Martin," a voice said smoothly. "This is Victor Romano." Dean closed his eyes briefly. "I was hoping you'd call," Dean replied. Victor chuckled. Confident. "Prepared," Dean corrected. A pause. Victor liked control. Dean had just denied him that. "I want to talk," Victor said. "Somewhere quieter." Dean glanced around the busy center. "I'm listening now." Another pause, longer this time. "I didn't invite you to debate me," Victor said, edge creeping in. "I invited you to understand each other." Dean's voice remained even. Understanding doesn't require intimidation. Silence. Then Victor laughed, but this time, it wasn't amused. "You're different," Victor said. "And different men don't last long in my world." Dean answered softly. "Then maybe your world needs different men." The line went dead. Pressure begins that evening. The pressure started. A permit Dean had been waiting months for was suddenly delayed. A donation promised to the community center was mysteriously withdrawn. A landlord hinted that the center's lease might not be renewed. Coincidence? Dean didn't believe in coincidence. He sat alone in the empty center that night. Lights dimmed. Michael's old jacket folded beside him. His brother used to wear it when working, Light said. It reminded him why he kept going. Dean ran his fingers over the worn fabric. And it shows others who they're not. Dean straightened. If Victor wanted a reaction, he wouldn't get one. Victor's obsession grows Victor, meanwhile, grew increasingly irritated. Every report came back the same. Dean didn't panic, didn't retaliate, didn't complain. Instead, people rallied around him. A local business owner offered free supplies. Parents volunteered. Even city officials, usually distant, began returning Dean's calls. Victor slammed his fist on the table. "Why won't he break?" he demanded. One of his men swallowed. Victor had built an empire on rules only he controlled. Dean refused to step onto the board, and that made him dangerous. The second meeting, Victor decided to escalate. This time, the meeting wasn't public. No chandeliers, no witnesses. Just two men, alone, in a private office overlooking the city. Victor gestured for Dean to sit. Dean remained standing. Victor smirked. "Still standing? I'm comfortable," Dean said. Victor leaned forward. "You could have reacted differently. So could you." Victor's smile vanished. "You think you're better than me?" Victor asked. Dean shook his head. "I think we made different choices." Victor's voice hardened. "Choices built this city." Dean met his gaze. "Choices also bury it." The words hit harder than any threat. The truth about Michael Victor stood abruptly. "You know why your brother died?" "My brother died because he believed one person could make a difference." Victor scoffed. And he was right," Dean said. Victor froze. Dean stepped closer, voice steady but charged with emotion. Every kid he helped, every fight he stopped, every life he touched that didn't die with him. Victor's hands trembled slightly. For the first time, Victor Romano felt something unfamiliar. Doubt. A line you can't uncross. Dean straightened his jacket. "You can take permits." Victor stared at him, breathing heavy. "And if I try?" Victor asked quietly. "Then you'll prove my brother was right, and that you're afraid." Victor didn't respond. Dean turned toward the door. As he reached it, Victor spoke again. "This isn't over." Dean paused, then replied without turning around. "It never was." Victor Romano stared at the file long after his men had left the room. The folder was thin, too thin. No criminal history, no scandals, no secrets, none that money or fear had uncovered. Dean Martin wasn't hiding anything the usual way. Oh, sure. That irritated Victor more than an enemy ever had. But it was the final page that made his hand tighten. A grainy police report. A witness statement marked inconclusive, and one familiar name. Michael Martin. Victor leaned back slowly. The name wasn't new to him. That realization sent a chill through a man who hadn't felt one in decades. A memory Victor tried to forget 3 years earlier. There had been a robbery, messy, unplanned, stupid. A young crew trying to prove themselves had hit the wrong convenience store at the wrong time. Victor hadn't ordered it. But it happened under his shadow. The report said a civilian intervened. Tried to calm things down. Tried to talk. Tried to stop a gun with words. The civilian died. Victor had skimmed the report back then. It's just another casualty in a city full of them. Or so he thought. Now he stared at the name again. Michael Martin, Dean's brother. Victor's throat tightened. He had connected the dots because he never expected someone like Dean Martin to walk into his world. And certainly not with that kind of calm. Dean's quiet fear across the city. Dean sat alone in his apartment, lights off, city noise bleeding through the windows. He held his phone loosely in his hand, staring at a message that hadn't been sent. If something happens to me, he deleted it. Dean wasn't reckless. He knew the risks now. Victor Romano wasn't just applying pressure anymore. He was digging. Digging meant danger. But what unsettled Dean wasn't fear for himself. It was the fear that Michael's death, his brother's memory, might be twisted into leverage. Michael had died doing the right thing. Dean would not let that be rewritten. The first real threat, the threat didn't come as violence. It came as information. The next morning, Dean arrived at the community center to find police tape across the entrance. An inspection notice was taped to the door fire, code violations, zoning issues, funding irregularities. All legal, all devastating. Parents stood confused. Volunteers whispered anxiously. Dean read the notice slowly. Then he folded it. He looked up and saw a black car idling across the street. Someone inside watched him. Victor Romano didn't need to send a message. He had sent a reminder. A dangerous invitation that night. Dean received another call. "Dinner," Victor said. No greeting. One last time, Dean exhaled. "Why?" "Because," Victor replied, "we're closer than you think." Dean hesitated. Then, "Send the address." The meeting that changed everything. This place was different. No luxury, no crowd. Just a quiet restaurant long past closing hours. 2 men, 1 table. Victor looked tired. Dean noticed immediately. "You know," Victor said, stirring his drink, "most men would have folded by now." Dean sat across from him. "Most men don't have anything left to lose." Victor studied him. "You think that makes you strong?" Dean answered honestly. "I think it makes me honest." Victor sighed. "You ever wonder," Victor asked, "if your brother would have survived if he'd just stayed out of it?" Dean didn't respond right away. Then, every day. Victor nodded. "Me too." That startled Dean. Victor set the glass down. "He died because of me," Victor said quietly. The words landed like a gunshot. The truth finally spoken. "I didn't pull the trigger," Victor continued. "I didn't even know it was happening, but my world made it possible." Dean felt his chest tighten. Victor went on. "Men under me got careless. Young, eager, and someone like your brother paid the price." Dean clenched his fists beneath the table. "Why tell me this now?" Dean asked. Victor met his eyes. "Because you didn't come at me with revenge," Victor said. "You came at me with something worse." Dean frowned. "What?" "A conscience." A man cornered by his own reflection. Victor leaned forward, voice low. "You don't threaten me. You don't beg. You don't hate me the way you should." Dean said quietly. "Hatred would make this easier." Victor nodded slowly. "Exactly." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Victor added, "If you go public with this, it ends badly for you." Dean didn't deny it. "And if I stay silent," Dean replied, "I betray my brother." Victor closed his eyes. For the first time, Victor Romano looked old. "The choice no one escapes. I can shut everything down," Victor said. "The inspections, the pressure. I can protect your work." Dean waited. "All you have to do," Victor continued, "is walk away." Dean finally spoke. "My brother stepped forward when everyone else stepped back," he said. "If I walk away now, then the joke you made about him becomes true." Victor flinched. Dean stood up. "I don't want revenge," Dean said. "I want truth." Victor looked up at him. "And if truth destroys everything?" Victor asked. Dean answered softly. "Then maybe it needed to be destroyed." The silence after the storm begins. Dean walked out. Victor remained seated. Alone for a long time. He knew now that the calm man he had tried to humiliate was standing at the edge of something far bigger than either of them. And for the first time in his life, Victor Romano was afraid. Not of violence, but of accountability. The truth was out. The silence was broken. And the city stood on the edge of a reckoning. Dean Martin had chosen truth over safety. Victor Romano had chosen confession over control. The city didn't wake up gently. It woke up like someone shaking a man who had been pretending to sleep for years. The first headline appeared just after sunrise. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic, it was careful, and that made it dangerous. Anonymous source links organized crime to civilian death 3 years ago. Dean Martin read it on his phone while standing outside the community center, still closed, still taped off. He didn't smile. He didn't feel victory. He felt weight, because truth doesn't arrive like fireworks. It arrives like gravity. Victor Romano's final move. Victor Romano had prepared for many endings. Prison, violence, betrayal. What he hadn't prepared for was this silence. No sirens, no immediate arrests, just phone calls that stopped coming. Men who used to answer on the first ring now weren't available. Business partners suddenly wanted distance. Longtime allies asked questions instead of offering protection. Victor stood in his office, staring at the city he once believed he owned. He didn't reach for a weapon. He reached for a pen and began to write. The confession no one expected. 2 days later, a sealed statement reached a journalist known for one thing: never exaggerating. The document was signed, not anonymous, signed Victor Romano. The confession didn't glorify anything. It didn't excuse anything. It didn't ask for mercy. It named names. It explained systems. It admitted responsibility, not just for one death, but for a culture that allowed it. And at the center of it all, Michael Martin, a civilian who tried to stop violence with words. A man who believed calm could matter. Dean's name goes public. Dean never wanted attention, but attention found him. Reporters stood outside the community center. Parents asked questions. Old friends called in disbelief. "Why you?" someone asked him. Dean answered the same way every time: "Because my brother didn't stay quiet." When asked if he feared retaliation, Dean paused. Then said, "Fear isn't what decides who we are. Choice is." The day Victor faced the mirror, Victor turned himself in without spectacle. No cameras, no grand statements. Just an older man walking into a building he had avoided his entire life. Before he entered, he paused. A memory hit him sharp and unwanted. A young man in a convenience store, hands raised, voice steady. Nobody needs to get hurt. Victor closed his eyes. For the first time, he wished he had listened. The cost of doing the right thing. The community center reopened, but not easily. Funding returned slowly. Some supporters vanished. Others stepped forward quietly. Dean lost sleep, lost comfort, lost anonymity. But he gained something heavier: responsibility. One night, alone in the center, Dean sat beneath a photo of Michael pinned to the wall. It showed his brother smiling, mid-laugh, unaware of how his life would endure, how far it would echo. Dean spoke softly. "You were right." The silence answered him, but it felt full. The question everyone asked months later, a student asked Dean during a workshop: "Do you think people like him can change?" Dean considered the question carefully. Then he said, "I think people can face what they've done. Change comes after if they choose it." Someone else asked, "Was it worth it?" Dean didn't answer right away. He looked at the room, at the kids, at the volunteers, at the quiet strength that had grown where fear once lived. "Yes," he said finally, "but it was never easy." A legacy stronger than fear. Victor Romano would spend the rest of his life paying for his choices. Michael Martin would never come back. But something unexpected happened. Violence in the neighborhood dropped. People spoke up sooner. Calm voices carried further. Not because fear disappeared, but because courage replaced it. The line that defined everything on the anniversary of Michael's death. Dean stood before a small crowd and said only one thing: "My brother believed that how you respond matters more than what you face." No applause, just understanding. The mob boss made a joke. He expected anger. He expected chaos. What he got was calm. And that calm did what fear never could. It ended an empire.